Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Post Military Podcast. If you're new here, this podcast mission is to provide its listeners with insights and perspectives to help you prepare for your transition out of the military and how to deal with everything that comes after that separation. If you've already transitioned out of the military or have never served in the military, the advice that's talked about on this podcast can really be applied to any major transition in life. Regardless, I'm grateful that you're here and hope you learned something today. Today, I'm joined by James Deitel, who is a former Naval cyber warfare officer. We discuss his transition out of the Navy, how to build a broad perspective so you can identify your purpose in multiple chapters of your life. And finally, we give advice to those who are preparing to transition out of the military. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Post Military Podcast. I'm Billy, as you already know, and today I am lucky enough to have James Deitel. Is it Deitel?
Deitel.
Deitel. James Deitel on today. He has been gracious enough to share his story and wisdom with you. So, without further ado, James, please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is James Deitel. I joined probably at a very interesting time. So, basically in high school, I watched the towers fall, right? And quickly afterwards, I was in the process of joining into the military, and the recruiters must have been having a great day because I was already signed up and starting to work through applying to the academies. And then, fortunately, I was accepted. But some of the things had to be changed around a little bit, right? Where right afterwards, I couldn't go get my physical done or anything like that. I had to work through the new processes and everything there. So I ended up going to Navy. They accepted me first, and so I just went with it. I tried applying to all of them. Army didn't have a good way to apply for a computer science person. I wasn't able to figure out how that worked, so I didn't apply to them. But Air Force and Navy I went with because I kind of knew from the beginning that's where I wanted to go. And I was at Naval Academy for 4 years, 25th Company to Bear Sharks. It was great. Part of that was really teaching me, as a 18-year-old, a little bit of culture shock. So my grandfather had gone and was in the Navy, but my father and my mother were both teachers. So I didn't really have much background, and so there was a large culture shock of beating out the 18-year-old on me, and trying to set me up the right way there. So went through that. Was supposed to be a pilot. Now I wasn't a very good pilot, so they decided instead of letting me crash, I would go and do something else. Now I was supposed to either be surface warfare and drive around in ships, but they also were saying, hey, because you have the computer science background, how about this computer area, information warfare? And now they had a list of requirements. I just kind of ran through them all as fast as I could. Did it all in one night, stayed up all night because I really didn't want to go on ships. So I was sent over to Hawaii. So I went to, so we did some stuff out there. Had a lot of fun doing stuff in the 7th Fleet, AOR. Was able to go to Afghanistan as part of a provisional reconstruction team over in Kunar province. So had a year of, I would say, Navy appreciation, or really understanding the differences between how joint operation works and being able to really understand what we can actually do and how the military functions, not only in the surface, but everything else. Afterwards, I went to because of what I was able to do there, went to Special Warfare Development Group, where I helped with training and the signals intelligence aspect of it. Shortly after that, I went over to the Red Team, broke into ships, had a lot of fun with submarines, and basically that making sure our equipment before we went overseas was safe, secure. And so at that time, shortly after that, met my wife. She's a doctor, not military, but being told where to go, I decided to follow the family instead of follow the military career. So I went to work at AIG, help out build their Security Operations Center Threat Intelligence Program, Insider Threat Program. A lot of good understanding from that. And then continued to follow my wife back to Nebraska. I was in the reserves for a little while, so down in San Antonio, where I was operations officer for NAC Reserve, Navy NAC Reserves in San Antonio. A lot of really fun stuff where you would, take over from the active duty into the reserve side. So during the week, active duty did their thing. We took it over during the weekend, handed it right back, so they didn't lose a beat, and that was a lot of fun there. And now I'm at AWS. I came in as an individual consultant on an IC contributor, which was very different because I wasn't a manager. Then I moved over into management just recently in the last few months, where I've been having a lot of fun there. So that was the long haul there for you.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate the history and the clarity, and I know that's very useful for everyone listening. When one question before we start talking about the meat of the podcast, were you doing physical penetration tests on ships, or was it all digital?
Most of it was digital. So part of our team did do physical items, but that was more towards bases as well. So a lot of it was taking a look at. I like calling it. We did shift left before people started timing up shift left. I think there's an old interview of me way back talking about it. When things are in development still, how do we get involved in that and really dig deep into it?
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, see, I'm imagining you just trying to like swim onto a submarine or something like that, which is some real spooky things.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing that I wanna talk to you about is, so you very briefly touched on it, where you said you met your wife, you knew you wanted to, and you ended up following your family instead of following the military. How did you Could you kind of dive further into that? How did you
Yeah.
make that realization? I mean, you went to a military college, so your entire adult life was military up until that point. How
Yep.
did you come to that realization of, I'm ready to separate myself from this thing for the sake of my family?
Yeah, and that's a tough one because like when we started going through that, and part of it is just kind of how the medical community and how doctors they get told where to go, even if you're not military, right? And so we were hoping that it would be set up so that there would be a place where I could go on my next deployment at the same time that she goes, right? But then we were looking at like a 3-hour trip, which is not horrible, especially given everything. But I think at that point is when I decided, just because of trying to separate the two things, that became too, I think would have been too difficult for our family. And so that's why I made the decision, okay, well, I can still go through the reserve process and still work that way, and then perhaps maybe even come back. I'm not sure. I know that rarely happens, but at the time, and you might not have seen it in the Navy, there was a lot of discussion of like, hey, how do you have like a 3-year gap, like kind of like a gap year almost, so that people can um, pursue other degrees, pursue a family, items like that. So there was some discussion. So it seemed more relevant and possible, I think, at the time as well. So that was some of the reasoning that kind of went in there. It was that moment seemed like the best one at the time.
That makes a lot of sense. And I also think that's a phenomenal reason and a very common reason for people to transition out, just family reasons. And so I think that your story is very applicable to a lot of people out that are
Mhm.
listening. So once you decided that, hey, I'm out, I need to prioritize my family, what did you start doing to prepare for your transition out? And how early in that how early did you how did you start preparing, and how early did you start? Was this like a snap decision, you have 3 months, or did you know and so you took like a year?
Yeah.
What did that preparation life cycle look like for you?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people know me. The prep work starts way, way back. So like almost as soon as I was out of the academy, I was trying to think of, okay, what is the next thing for my career if I go down this way, this way, this way, and all these different thoughts. So there was always like a post-career thought of where I possibly could go. Um, and that included like taking advantage of the tuition reimbursement with the Navy. So I got my master's degree while I was still in the Navy, and got all paid for that way. It became more relevant as I started talking with my wife, and there's a timeline. So we knew there was like a milestone where a decision had to be made, and we had an idea of the different paths. And so I was trying to figure out, well, if I'm getting out, which are the best paths for me given at the time I was in doing the red teaming stuff. So a lot of it goes right into like physical. So a lot of the penetration testing, like a lot of in the hacker communities that I'm a part of and that tie into penetration testing, well, there's lots of good consulting work afterwards that you can think about doing, whether it be with a defense contractor or whoever, or regular industry, things like that. So I started going down the path of, well, how can I do two things at the same time, both to help my Navy career? Because, I mean, one of the options was still stay in the Navy, right? Maybe if she was assigned to San Antonio, I could have stayed active and gone to San Antonio. So I chased down like certifications that would meet multiple goals, whether I was to stay in or to get out, right? So that was kind of my thinking as we were going through that, and so like it starts really early, and then I was trying to figure out which ones make sense, especially as I get out, both helping out with certifications. Like IT is very certification heavy, and there's a lot of overlap. Um, so that's what allowed me to kind of a goal of as I was getting out, how I could transition into something else, which I ended up doing.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess the first question that I want to ask you based off of what you just said is when you talk about maintaining multiple paths or having that idea as you're going through your career, one, I believe that there's a whole way of thought in the military where if you're thinking outside of the military, you're almost being selfish. And I would love to know what your response would be to that, like being able to keep your options open or at least thinking about it throughout your career for those that are still in.
Yeah. So I'm a bad academy graduate, but somewhere in the mission it says it highlights we're not really doing it just for the military time in the military. We're doing this also to be citizens of the United States, and so I kind of take that to heart. Like where my citizenship does not end with being in the military, right? And I really took that to heart. And I think there is also this the thought of just because you're leaving, you're giving up on everything else. Well, I don't agree with that, right? There's lots of different ways that you can help support other people who have gone before you, who are coming after you, and being able to work along those lines. So and I think there's also I had a easier transition because I was also like, well, I'll continue to do this through the reserves, right? Which leads into another, like there was a second departure date, right, for me, because at some point I decided not to do the reserves anymore after my first child was born, and suddenly I was realizing, oh no, I cannot maintain this and the wife and all these different things all going together, and then I had to almost do a second transition. Um, so there's almost two of those things going on. So
Yeah.
it's fun.
Well, I definitely want to cover how you kind of work through like your halvesies transition and then your for realsies transition. But what I want to cover first is when you kind of touched on it when you say you're evaluating multiple options, and what I'm hearing is you really tried to find avenues or actions that you could take that would benefit your Navy career and your possible civilian career at the same time. Do you
Correct.
think that beyond that, there are any other things that you would recommend to somebody who is looking to constantly make those inside and outside evaluations as they move through their military career?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of thought on, again, when you have to figure out where you fit in a lot of these buckets. I think there is a great discussion point on like what is your purpose, what's kind of your true north. There's certainly a big driving factor for me initially because of citizenship and duty to my country, around, right, especially around 9/11, right? Like I was standing right next to my brother when I watched the towers go down. That somewhat cemented, more than somewhat, it cemented my decision on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I volunteered later on to attach to an army unit to go do some of those things. So that's all motivation towards wanting to do the right thing and do of what and the direction I felt was the right way to cause the most impact possible, right? And making sure I aligned that way. So that's a big aspect of it. And then there's lots of folks who are telling you, what is the best thing for your career, and we're like, and also how to live your life, because we all know military is a career that is a larger portion of your life than many other things. We're a profession. We buy into this. Like we have oaths into this. This is not just it ends from 9 to 5, right? And it stays with you for the rest of your life, right?
You're saying they don't
And
have you
so,
swear into they don't have you swear into AWS
no,
when you
they do
join?
not.
No? Okay.
No, no,
Okay.
you have some leadership principles, but you don't put your an oath together or anything like
Yeah.
that. If so,
Yeah.
I missed it, and
Yeah.
and
So
that's
did I.
probably for the best, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I think those are some of the considerations to really be playing, and also where can you be the most effective, right? There are certainly aspects of certain personalities where you're going to fit in better, whether you're in the military or out somewhere else, right? Um, like one of the things I was looking for in particular in my organizations was looking for smaller groups. I enjoyed working with smaller groups as opposed to some of the larger ones, right? And I think that's the same with every service, just because that fit more with how I thought and how I operated, right? So,
You're a very insightful person. I've come to realize, which is like you really have this wonderful ability to define what your purpose is and the characteristics of organizations that speak to you, or the things the large the large brushstrokes of a thing that you want to be a part of, is probably how I would describe it. Do you think that that's something that you've inherently had your entire life, or is it something that's developed? And if it's been developed, how did you get there? Because I think that a lot of people have a real problem. They know they like something, or they know why they like working at a place, but they couldn't tell, like they can't define it. It's just this very vague, I feel good here and I don't feel good there.
mhm. um, I think we know it. It's difficult to articulate it, and I think part of the problem is how to articulate it, and is a big thing. I think one of the things that has was really helpful at the academy was taking like some of the courses like literature of war. Like it doesn't really relate to the like weapons. It's not like the I don't know how they with the Air Force Academy how they did it, but like we have to basically go straight up into we can take this like weapons course that is our kind of like everything builds up kind of to that. So that's why we take our calculus. That's why we take all and this very wide breadth of information includes some of these liberal like, and when I say liberal, I mean in the old sense of the word, a very wide range of things to think about, like the old school knights. Really, you have a wide range of things you're thinking about, so you can articulate different areas of it. So I think I've always strove to try to understand lots of different viewpoints that way. Um, and so reading a lot, I think a lot of the podcasts that are worth listening to, and thinking about different perspectives on why people are considering different things, right? It I think that helps create a mirror to look at what you're doing and like, oh yeah, I agree with that, or no, this is ridiculous and I don't agree with that, right? And I think that's what might allow like that to me to be more articulate about that, because I feel like everyone knows it, but to your point, like it's hard to bring that out and actually say that in a line.
I think that there's really three levels to it. You either have no awareness of the things that inspire you, you have some vague awareness of the things that inspire you. You just can't tell someone else. You just kind of know from a feeling of what that looks like. And then that third level is you understand it to the level that you can then explain it to somebody else. And the further up you are on that, in that like scale, I think the better you'll be when it comes to finding purpose and fulfillment once you get outside of the military. And it's definitely something people should think about if they're not thinking about it right now. So, as you so you're preparing for this transition and you
Mhm.
knew that you wanted, so you know that your wife is not going to be going to a place where you can stay active duty, and so you've done all of this legwork and you're going to transition out.
Mhm.
How did you decide then this is where I'm going to go work? But then
Yep.
also, how did you make the final determination that you were in fact going to go into the reserves for your
Yep.
Havesies transition?
Gotcha. So probably the biggest part was the realization that again I would be like any place I could possibly go would still be too far away, because again, even if I put in for something, it might be way longer, like a way longer distance at the end of the day to get there, right? So like she could, if me putting in for San Antonio is not a guarantee, right? It when she got sent to Houston, right? So I think that realization, I think, because when we got that, um, obviously this was going through my mind at the time, and so when we found that out, I pretty much had a meeting with my commanding officer to go pretty quickly within a week or two of like, hey, we need to talk because I don't know how to keep doing this. Like, I don't know how I'd be able to do this. Um, and then try to get some advice from them, which was it was good, but it I don't know, it might have been too practical, whereas it wasn't like again going back to weighing, hey, what's important for you at the end of the day? What's important for how you see your life and moving forward? And so the reserve um, part of it was again, I thought this is a great way to continue to serve, and I thought again I might be able to come back in later on, which might have been a little bit misguided, but something I was considering. And then there was a unique opportunity because then I was able to pretty easily guarantee to be able to drill out of San Antonio, which was great. Um, and then I was able to kind of keep up some of the skills because I realized also I was going to be losing. I guess this kind of goes into job search as part of this kind of overlaps with the job search. So when I was looking for jobs then and going through that process, some of the places were more. I was trying to look in the Houston area, also seeing how does remote work, how does that kind of deal into everything. And this was at a time before remote work is as prevalent as it is now, right? Where it's very different in even in the last 2 years. Um, and so I think I was looking at Mandiant and at um, a few other consulting groups, but I was kind of debating between everything. And frankly, AIG came in with a better offer. And so I was like, okay, great. I'll take this offer that is local to there. I'm going to be really close to where I'm going to be. And it sounded like a really great opportunity that fit in with what I wanted to do. And then yeah, and then the reserve part just kind of attached onto it, like, oh well, and then I could drill here, and it all just kind of aligned that way. If that makes sense.
That's really cool. And for your job search, I think this is probably the most covered thing that you can find in terms of resources for veterans leaving the military. We really don't cover how to find your purpose and like how to deal with the separation from the military, but there are plenty of things on LinkedIn and on Google, and really what the focus of the TAPS program is, it's how do you find a job? Because
Yep.
we don't want unpaid homeless vets, which I think is great. But what did you do to start looking for your job that you felt was really effective in getting you a position at AIG and other possible offers and options?
Yep. So I mean, a lot of it was like the same things like you say you're going to see in TAP class, right? So it was looking around on the job sites, using LinkedIn, trying to talk with other people in the area to find out things that were close by. Unfortunately, Houston wasn't a large military town. Otherwise, um, I would have been able to like probably find out some additional hooks there. I think what I didn't do well, and I think I would caution against, is I didn't read my contract well enough. And I think this is something that I continually run into. And we also don't do it well enough in like, you think you're going to go there, even in like your next job assignment or something, like, I'm going to do this. And then you're actually doing this. Um, I see this time and time again. So that was kind of the same thing that happened with going to AIG. I thought I was doing something initially very different, and then it evolved into something else. So I think the biggest part I would suggest for everyone who's looking is, one, realize your decision. You can change your mind later on. But it's going to be easier to change your mind and find something else. One, if you have a job right there, and it's okay to switch. I've seen people switch quite often, right outside the military, where they go into one, they realize, oh no, this is definitely not what I was thinking about, and either they find something else inside the company, which is oftentimes easier, or something else now that they have a network where you're moving. It's also different if you are going to someplace be outside of where you're based, which I was in Norfolk at the time, not in Houston. So I had to move across country and then establish. Whereas if I was in Norfolk, I would have been able to establish some things nearby. So I think the big part I would just always recommend is double check what you're signing up for and who else, but also don't be afraid. You're not stuck there like for 3 years. There's not a contract. You're not going to like upset. Uh, you're not going to everyone you upset. It's okay because they don't have a permanent record, right? Like we do in the military. So
Yeah. I do want to hit, we'll touch on what you just said here soon. The next piece that I want to talk about though is, so when you get into AIG, you leave active duty, you're in the reserves. I'm not in the reserves. I exited under circumstances where I was not unable to join the guard or the reserves. And so what do you feel like being part of the reserves and working it? What did that feel like? Because
sure,
you still have part of that military attachment. You still have part of that service to country. Um, I'm not trying to approximate my experience to yours in any way, but one thing that's been really beneficial to me is that my wife is still in the military. So like I still feel kind of attached, which is I think
sure.
very beneficial for me in terms of how I am doing with separating my identity from the military. But what was that like for you in this kind of halfway period before you left the reserves and ended up
Yeah.
elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. I never realized how much that was tied into my identity or how long it'll stay tied into your identity. Didn't realize that. But I even the 2 days a month was going from every single day since, like you said, I was 18 until till then, like I'd always say, "Hey, I'm James. I'm in the Navy," like, and that was just how it happened. So it was somewhat devastating, I think, to my psyche when suddenly I lost that part of my identity. It was never like I am getting ready to go do this, to go in some ways to save the world, right, and help with my brothers and my sisters. That's not there anymore. And so it was very strange, and there's a lot of culture shock as well, because a lot of the time, I had a very successful military career, and I wore that, often on my chest every single day. And then suddenly I have to go into I was going into meetings, and I didn't have that. And then I also couldn't quickly read like, okay, well, what did this person do? How can I relate to them better and all that? It's definitely like a cheat sheet of being able to interact with people in the military, because you kind of know what you have, and you have that shared experience that you have with them, and suddenly you don't have that anymore. So probably the biggest, most beneficial thing was the reserves was really helpful for me, right? Because then suddenly I could go back and I could, at least for a little while, assume that, and then um, it helped with that transition. I also helped set up the affinity group, or um, the the veterans group at the AIG Houston office. So Kyler Cole is a very strong, smart guy from West Point. We won't hold that against him, but he was there with at AIG, and we helped set up like this organization to kind of like recognize veterans, help bring out their experience and their unique values that we provide in the workplace that can sometimes go overlooked just because they're like, oh, you're military, therefore all these pigeonhole things that some of them are true, some of them are not. But it's very different if you then turn it. So I think that affinity group and setting up that was another huge part of helping me realize who can be speak similar to me, set up mentorships, and that two-way communications that has been extremely helpful um, after that. And then there was also there's lots of groups out there. Red, white, blue. It was one that we were partnering with lots. That was very helpful to like either going in and helping other folks, just tying into we also had the Naval Academy had a group there, a rather large group of people where again we have the shared heritage, we can share stories, we can help support each other. So like that was beneficial to get involved in the other activities that are military adjacent, because they're not for them, but we're getting that same group of people, like-minded people, so we can still kind of step into that culture occasionally, right? Especially when you're kind of more adrift right after leaving the
Definitely.
military.
Do you feel like that loss that you felt? I mean, you said it was very impactful to you, and I completely agree. It was for me as well. Did it feel, was it more insidious? Like you felt something kind of and you had to eventually come to the realization that, "Oh, I'm sad because I've lost something," or do you think you like the day after you left, you're like, "Yep, this is it. Like I totally expected this."
It was more subtle for
Yeah,
me. I know it's different for tons of folks. It was a lot of the like realizing that, hey, a lot of the things that I had done before don't mesh up with what I want to do now, and how does that. So I think there's a lot of that kind of snuck in, and especially, and I think part of it is just like kind of repurposing and rethinking about some of these items. And I think it also comes back as well, because when the probably the biggest one, with the recent with Afghanistan, and how with the withdrawal with Afghanistan, I know a lot of veterans have had lots of issues, going back and having lots of questions there. But there's also like even great events like my peers taking command of ships, right? reaching that next rank and going, oh man, I wish I could have done XYZ. I wish I would have stayed in a little bit longer. And being like, what if? There's so many what ifs that sneak up as well. So I think the big part is realizing that that's going to be there, and I don't it's not that it's different. Well, no, it's different because now I kind of know these things will keep happening, right? I know there will be a round of my friends going from commander to captain, and what does that mean, right? And why is that okay that I didn't choose that route? Like, what would I have had to give up? Um, and kind of be happy with your life because I think there's lots of regret for everyone, but especially when you can see everyone where we had like really like here is your timeline, this very set in stone of how everything will occur in your life, and that path at some point when you choose to deviate, it'll go a different direction, right? And realizing that's okay, that's it's part of life, and whether or not you would be willing to trade that for anything.
I think no, I think that's a phenomenal response. The one thing that I will say to all of the listeners, and I've said this before, and you'll probably hear me say it again on this podcast a bunch of times, is even if you crush your transition, you're still gonna feel loss. This isn't a my the biggest misconception that I had is because I got out of the military pretty frictionless with very little friction. I did well. Like everything kind of went my way. I even got a sick job at a company that everybody wanted to be a part of immediately. Like I thought I should feel a lot better about my transition than I did. And a year later, I go, feel really weird. Why do I feel weird? And so then recognizing, like, oh, I'm sad because I'm not part of the military anymore. Like, why is this happening? And so just understand that it creeps in. And I guess James, when you make that that realization that that these things will creep in because you're like you said, you can literally track your possible progress, which outside of the military, we don't have that. It's like maybe you make the right decision, maybe not. But also when those moments of doubt come up, even the moments of doubt where you go, man, did I pick the right job? Like, did I do what I'm supposed to do? How do you work through those moments where you might have those questioning like those questions come up? How do you personally work through that and um, kind of move like just ride that wave all the way to its conclusion?
Yeah. So, and I think part of it is there are some obviously there's some great benefits in being in the civilian world as well, right? The having 3 kids who are 7, 4, and 1, the fact that I can still see them every night, I can't imagine like going on deployment like so many people do and making that sacrifice again and again and again. And uh, I think that has changed a lot of my perception as well of not really ever wanting to give that up, right? And it highlights the sacrifice we ask for people to do and realizing that, you know what, I really appreciate that other people are able to do that, but that wasn't a right decision for me. Um, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me personally. And I think for everyone, it's going to be very different. There's also for the job aspect, like doing pen testing with the Navy was a lot of fun. I think I have better tools now outside of it because of there's so many restrictions and different things like that. I had to use computers, which I would actually do a lot of my studying. I'd go in, I'd do some stuff in the skiff, and then I'd head back out, and I'd do something on a Raspberry Pi on this little like that is more cutting edge and more interesting. I think that's changing a little bit, but there are some of those um, that some of that there, and so I think there's those things as well. And then also I think the reason why people get out is also just really important, right? So if for the different ways that it kind of brings up.
I think I completely agree with you, and I think what you said at the beginning of the podcast, where you one had really good grounding principles of why you left, which was family reasons, and then also being to articulate and understand the things that you desired to place yourself in and trying to find those things outside of the military. Both of those things combine to really give you a foundation to ride out those storms that will eventually show up. And I think it's a great lesson for anybody. You really do need to define what it is that you want. Why did you get out? A, and then B, what fulfills you in a more agnostic sense outside of the military so that you can really dive into those things post military so you have that purpose so that when the the wave comes where you feel some level of regret for leaving, you can ground yourself in those principles. And I think that that's really really awesome and just a great message for people to hear. um
And just to toss on,
yeah, no,
then
please do.
also the fact you have, like, don't forget all the amazing things you have done on service either. Like, I go back and think of, like, this was so cool when I did XYZ. It was so cool when I found tracked down a radio station that was on a donkey that was being moved through Afghanistan, right? And they're amazing stories, and people always will, like, oh, I want to hear about that story, I want to hear about that story. And remember, that was you did this amazing stuff back there. And I think that, um that's also some of one of the things, like, that is really unique about the opportunity to have served, even for a short amount of time, even though you didn't get to serve, however long that you wish you could became, admiral of some kind of space. I don't know. I don't want to say space force, but some kind of admiral of a intergalactic, thing that you read out. You got what you got.
That cool
So
sci-fi stuff. The
yeah,
so I guess a question that I want to ask you then is, um I think some people will hear different messages on this podcast and they'll think uh position that I'm trying to push with all of the guests is you need to move on from your military experience, which I think is completely false. I think that everyone who has served should be incredibly proud of their service. And what I'm trying to say is that there is just a loss that you're going to feel, but you should always be proud of the fact that you raised your hand and you served. And so for you, how do you maintain that pride in your career, but then also reconstruct your identity as James the American and be able to move on from that chapter of your life while also paying it the respect and the reverence that it's due?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's little things like get the swag, right?
Yeah.
You can go ahead and support that on the
Yeah.
different things. But it's also, like, I think there's a lot. Like, I'm part of the Warriors Affinity group, with Amazon. I was part of building out the veterans group at AIG. Like, all these places of trying to find other people similar to you going through the, like, help. You can continue to help out your brothers and sisters out there, right? So I think that is a huge aspect of it and a huge component of it. Um, and then I think, yeah, and I'm not sure if, like, I'll ever really completely move on, because even, like, when I work out, I'm like, oh, I need to work out soon in case I get, oh wait, I'm not going to be deployed again. But that is still, like, strangely in the back of my mind. And maybe I've been reading too much sci-fi, because I could keep thinking of, like, in case something happens where they decide to recall me. But anyway, I think that it's okay to keep some of those rituals you had as well, like that morning PT, or making, some of those things that, we had. That it's okay to have those, and I think those are really good to incorporate in a day, if it helps you remember what you did, and it helps you kind of focus on different things, right? So
That makes sense. So what so now we're going, so you're in the reserves, you're working for AIG, then you figure out that working in the reserves is no longer sustainable for you.
yep.
How did that transition differ from your first transition? because and or did you recycle a lot of the tools that you used the first time, and what did that look like in a general sense?
So it's definitely easier because then it was cutting. It's a less of a drop, right? Going from like full time since you're 18 until like I was doing that for another 4 years. So and then I was able to get on out. And even then, I had a small step because I had already established that veteran group in at AIG. I had already I also volunteered to be a blue and gold officer for it's Naval Academy, help with admissions. So I interviewed high schoolers. I did those things as well, right? So I continue just like small steps to slowly phase out um, some of those things. And I think that helped just it was just kind of more of the same. It definitely wasn't as big. And then it was continually to keep finding ways to do what was successful. Because again, I didn't have anything like this to say, hey, by the way, you're going to feel a huge sense of loss right after you give up, because like suddenly, I mean, I think I wore shirt stays for another year into my first career because I couldn't wear what I wanted to the office, unfortunately, and I had to show up to the office. And so I had khakis and I had shirts. Like that was just I didn't need to
Listen,
do that the second time around.
I
So
still wear shirt stays when I wear
yeah,
button-down shirts. I feel
yeah,
so gross if my
yep.
shirt is like doing the weird like
I know,
if you're in the
I know.
military you get it. But yeah, no,
Yep,
that's just one of those things that's carried over. So from the military side of your second transition, it sounds like you had established more community. You're already giving back, so you've established this sense of service outside of the military, but it's also still attached to the military. So that really helped catch you the
yeah,
second time. But leaving AIG and going to AWS, I'm really interested in this because I still have yet to leave my first job to go to my second job. And
sure.
we in the military, we're really good at adapting to things that are given to us. And we're taught to just grin and bear it in situations where we might not like it. And we also feel extreme senses of loyalty to the organizations because it's what we are. So, what was that like for you to leave AIG and move on to AWS? You had said previously that like there is no hard record on us. We're just going and kind
Sure.
of doing our thing because it benefits us. What was that like? Is that a thought that you have now developed? Was it hard for you to leave AIG and go to AWS? Like what was that like for you to go from your first civilian job to your second one?
Yeah. So another, I think, pro tip, just for everyone. I think everyone should move like I love the fact that in the military you have a new job technically every like 2 to 3 years. I kind of kept that tradition going alive at AIG. And then it just um, started to reach the point where um, I had a friend at business school who recommended AWS, and he said, "Hey, look, like this is we operate very similar to how you do work, right? Because we'd gone through a lot of different things at business school, and when he made that recommendation and I went through the process, that's when I saw, oh yeah, actually this fits really well into some of the things I view as important. Um, and I was also really thinking about how to think about my next step as in my career. Like so, it was more of like a transition, and then it just happened to transition to another company more than anything else for me. So again, I think kind of going all the way back, like always be thinking about what you want to be doing, like the next 10 years, vaguely, but what do you want to do the next 1 or 2 years really badly, so that you can be thinking about that, and then it just happened to be outside of AIG because AIG had really interesting opportunities. Like I switched what I did there often, as they popped up, because I think as they realized, hey, he knows these different things, he shows an interest, as I got involved in them, then suddenly like, oh, they need someone to do something, and they chose me, right? And then that tended to be the pattern. And I think that's something also might take a year or two, especially during the transition out, for like people to realize, oh, they instead of being told where you're like, you're going to change in the military, you kind of you have an idea, like you put yourself out there and then you're picked in the civilian world, which is very, very different and then a lot of what we see in the military. So that I think that's how the transition kind of happened along that way. And again, I think I really do appreciate everything AIG, all the opportunities AIG had provided for me. It was a lot of really interesting things, but AWS was just offering some really cool technology items. Maybe it was because I just did my uh, two AWS security certifications, and I was really, really excited. And combine that with someone saying, "Hey, this culture is going to like align with you almost exactly." Yeah, that might have been what kind of pushed you over. So again, what I'd recommend for people when they're thinking about it, think about, hey, does this align with what I want to do and how I like to operate? Um, is it going to align with what my family goals are? Is it going to align with like my career goals much later on? I think if you can think about all those things, helps out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely think for people leaving the military the first time is scary, and then it's such a dramatic transition that you end up in your first job and you're like, well, I can't leave now, like I just got I just got here. And
Yeah.
so it's something that should happen and will happen, and people should not veterans should not have a fear of it, just because it, it's just a natural, it's just like just how it works out here. But I think it's just hard for people after they've had such a tumultuous exit that they want to just chill, but sometimes that's not the right thing for you. Um, so for you now that you have been, now that you're not in the reserves anymore, you're working for
Yep.
AWS. How would you say that your goals and priorities have shifted? Like in turn, now that you're completely separated from the military, outside of your like the stuff that you're doing for veterans, what does that look like for you? Because you said up front, like citizenship, service, like those are big things for you. And so how have you pursued that now that you're not part of the reserves and you're just full time James the guy?
Yep. James the guy. Well, so a lot of it does go back to there's many ways you can help support your fellow veterans. So like as part of AWS, we have something called candid chats, which are basically anyone coming in and doing that would be interested in interviewing at AWS. They speak with a veteran first, which is great. So I've spoken with several dozen folks back when we had a larger hiring surge on, hey, what is it like here? What should I think about? And items along those lines. And also I've been advocating for things because there are unique skill sets that are overlooked during hiring. And one of my jobs is being an advocate, right? So I'm a bar raiser, which for non-AWS folks, that is on every single hiring um, interview loop, you have at least one person who is who's supposed to be completely separated other than making sure it's a great candidate decision and making sure when hiring managers are thinking about it, they're choosing the right person. Well, I'm an advocate for if there's a veteran in there, there's additional things on that we want to make sure are considered, especially. So that's another large aspect. So I know several folks that might not have been hired that are now hired. Because of that additional advocating for that, right? And then there is a lot of citizenship, like just through volunteering with the school and at the local level here in Nebraska. So, there's that additional some of those additional things. I think what is happening is there's going to be a downward like lull, and then there's going to be going back up because, and we see this with all of our like veteran organizations, like as soon as you have kids, it again it drops down until the kids start leaving home, right? Just and that's just kind of part of how life is. So is instilling that citizenship in my children, whatever way they'll go. I'm not sure if they'll be able to go attend the academies. I'm just hoping they will.
The Air Force
And
Academy is the best
providing
one. You
sympathy.
should tell them that.
I will keep that under wraps.
So, I think you talking about your kids is a wonderful transition into the next topic that I want to ask you about is
Yeah.
how have you found community or purpose outside of your job? Because one thing
Mhm.
that I think that people forget is the military does an excellent job of instilling purpose in your work because you're serving the
Yep.
nation, but also a
Mhm.
lot of community in the sense that you're literally around people who work in the military. You might live on base, you work out at their gyms, you shop at their grocery stores. Like it's all very all
Yep.
consuming. How have you found community and purpose outside of work and outside of maybe veteran organizations post military career?
Yep. Probably the largest is I'm part of a hacker community called DEF CON. So, and there's a lot of DEF CON communities. So, meeting up with other people who have similar strange interests around lock picking, buffer overflows, breaking into stuff has been a huge additional component. So, being part of those communities that has been really helpful for me, and probably where I find the most additional kind of support and kind of people who understand I'm slightly strange in different ways, right? And we can share that strangeness together. Um, so a lot of that is again just whatever you're interested in. Make sure you reach out and figure out those things and meet up with other people who are doing that, because you can get and for me, I also do a lot of I like doing work. So I like doing volunteer work. So I volunteer for conferences, for hacker conferences. I volunteer to go speak at those different things. That is a huge part of who I am, of really making sure I'm there, and then also trying to help support folks early in their career manage that and accelerate in those different ways. Um, so that's how I've been doing a lot of it. I tried to join like run clubs and other things along those lines. I think I joined the CrossFit cult for a little bit. Those didn't stay as long as the hacker community.
Well, I mean, it sounds like based off of your career and what you like, it just sounds like tech and that red team style of cyber work is it's not just a job for you. It's very much so a passion and a hobby, and so it's very nice when you can align those things. Certainly, and so
Yeah.
I definitely think that it is important to try and find those interests, and if they align with your work, I think that that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, the next question that I want to ask you is, and this kind of goes back to you say you didn't know what you were going to feel when you got out, and I think
Yep.
that everyone thinks that when they get out, and I think something else is so many people are just absolutely jazzed to get out of the military, and I've talked to folks who are they're like, dude, I'm so excited to get out, and I go, well, just wait, and they're like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, I'm so excited to get out. I was like,
Yep.
okay, what what do you think you would need to hear? Like, you're going back and you're talking to like, were you a lieutenant commander or a commander at the time when you got out?
Lieutenant Commander.
What do you think you would have had to say to Lieutenant Commander Deitel for him to actually understand, like, hey, man, you're gonna feel something, and you need to like you need to gear up for it.
That is a fantastic question. I'll have to think about that a little bit longer. That because I'm not sure just because I had never it's unique. I have never felt that way before, partly because like um I was yeah, all the other groups like in high school and everything, I'm like, it's all right. I was a band nerd, so it's cool. I played the tuba. Um, but yeah, I didn't ever go through like, man, I'm really a tuba player, and I really should have thought about that. Um, at the end of the day, yeah. So I think more than anything, just letting people know. I think this is a great opportunity just to let people know, right? And I think you're doing a great thing of letting people know, like, hey, by the way, this is going to come, and here's some coping strategies for you. Um, because, like you said, I think there's a lot of folks who are like, I can't wait until I'm going to be done, and then like there are some times I'm like, in my crazy days of, man, it was so easy when I could just wake up, go work out, and then and maybe that's also just I wishing for a time when I was 20 and single and the crazy stuff I could get up to in Hawaii versus what I can get up to now. So, but I think it's really important just to kind of like at least understand that there's a phase change that happens, and this is not like I think it's unique culturally because of the military, but I think everyone kind of realizes like there's all these things that you used to do, or kind of, and then things that have changed, right? So I think just being aware of that, I probably won't have changed his mind, but Lieutenant Commander Dido will have at least had some better insight when he was like, "Oh, this is what this is," right? So
I think, yeah, and I'll just say to everyone listening, like, it really does not matter if you hate being in the military or you love being in the military or you're like the world's most neutral person about the military. You're gonna all that happens is a major part of your life is just gone one day. And if you hate it, now
yeah,
you have nothing to hate. If you love it, now you have nothing to love. And if you're completely neutral about it, then you have to fill that neutral space with something. So you just have to understand that this is going to happen and it's okay because it happens to everybody, but there's ton of different ways to deal with it. Everyone has to find out what their thing is, and hopefully like you'll get through it. A lot of people have done it, and you can too. So James, last question that I'll ask you before we hop off is, we talked a lot, lots of advice has been given. Thank you so much for taking the time to really share your wisdom with everybody. Do you have any more final save rounds, anything like overarching advice to someone who's transitioning out of the military? What do you tell them?
I think the biggest thing is thank you for your service. Yeah, I know people say it a lot, but it's really important to realize how much you've given up, and how much that is worthwhile, right? And also how lucky you are to do that, right? Because why I hate people saying that to me is like, yeah, but you know all the cool things I got to do, like, and then fondly look back upon that. So reflect upon the really awesome stuff and make that list, whether it's 900 things or just two, of what you can really look back on in the day and what you want to really remember, because it's really cool. That being said, there's still lots of cool stuff you get to do, and also appreciate the fact of what's coming up, and really understanding that aspect of it. So I think if you can keep both of those things in mind, which is somewhat tough, uh, you'll do a really good job there.
Definitely. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everyone out there, for taking the time to listen. I hope that you have learned something that'll help you on your transition, or if you're a veteran out there, that we've given you some tips to help possibly move on if this is something that you're still struggling with. Um,
Mhm.
if James is out there, hit him up if you ever want to talk. And yeah, we'll see you all next time on the next episode of the Post Military Podcast. See you, everybody. Peace.